Clara and Jake had spent months preparing for their first Thanksgiving in their new home. A charming late Victorian house, with its weathered shingles and creaking floorboards, had drawn them in with its rustic beauty and affordable price, both attributes they desperately needed after graduating. They envisioned a festive feast filled with laughter and love, but as the day approached, a sense of unease weighed on them like the dense fog. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived, bright and crisp. Clara, bustling in the kitchen, was busy prepping the turkey. "Could you grab me the thyme from that cabinet, honey?" she called over her shoulder. Jake, fiddling with the oven's temperature, opened the cabinet but paused. Instead of herbs, he found an old yellowing photograph lodged between jars of spices. It depicted a family gathered around a table, their faces a mix of smiles and shadows. The lady in front wore an expression that seemed almost alive, and her eyes seemed to bore into his. "Clara, come look at this," Jake shouted, but when she rushed in, it was nothing but a photograph in his hands. When he turned to ask if she saw the lady's odd expression, Clara was already gone, focused on the gravy simmering on the stove, her brow furrowed in concentration. As the day progressed, whispers began to permeate the air. It started as a soft murmur, the kind that could be mistaken for the wind through old cracks and gaps. Clara shrugged it off, blaming it on drafty windows, but Jake's skin prickled every time he heard it. The atmosphere thickened, each buzz igniting a strange foreboding in his chest, an expectation of something unwelcome. Dinner time approached. They beautifully arranged the table, complete with their finest china and an assortment of side dishes. The old chandelier's flickering light cast peculiar shadows on the walls, and Jake couldn't help but feel they were not alone. "Did you notice the lights? They keep flickering," he said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, it's just old wiring. Everything is fine," Clara replied, but her voice had a slight tremor. As they gathered around the table, the whispers surged into a cacophony of familiar voices, tangible and sharp. Both Clara and Jake froze. They looked at each other, eyes wide with fear. The kitchen chairs slowly scraped back, as if an invisible force were pulling them, inviting the unseen to join their feast. "Who's there?" Jake called, voice unsteady. In that instant, the entire table shifted, the turkey sliding perilously close to the edge. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, and Jake leapt forward to save their dinner, but before his fingers could grip the platter, it had lifted and crashed to the floor, splattering gravy like blood against the whitewashed walls. From the shadows, laughter echoed, rising and falling in delight as if mocking them. The room felt colder, and ghostly figures began to materialize, specters in sepia tints who once lived in this house. They circled around Clara and Jake, their features clouded but their intentions clear. They wanted to reclaim their space. Panic set in. Clara gripped Jake's arm, her heart thundering in terror. "We need to leave," she breathed, her voice trembling with urgency. But the shadows danced closer, their laughter swelling, drowning out their cries. The spirits roared as they drew nearer, celebrating an unending Thanksgiving, one that Clara and Jake had mistakenly intruded upon. In that moment, the couple was certain of one thing. They would never have a Thanksgiving feast in this haunted home. Not while the specters of its past lingered, eager to feast on the dreams of the living. In the early dusk of autumn, Margaret Holloway stood before the crumbling facade of the Rookhaven Hotel. Once a luxurious retreat for the affluent, it was now a shadow of its former self, enveloped by wild, overgrown weeds and the eeriness of decades long forgotten. The locals whispered tales of vanishings and malevolent spirits that roamed its halls, but Margaret had always found comfort in the macabre. So when she stumbled upon the property at an auction, a rush of thrill pulsated through her veins. She envisioned restoring it to its former glory and perhaps unveiling its hidden past. The first night was quiet enough, the only sound being the creak of the wooden floors as the wind howled outside. She set up her sleeping arrangements in what had once been the grand ballroom, brushing off cobwebs and inhaling the familiar scent of old wood and dust. Her plans swirled in her mind, but as sleep beckoned, a sudden chill ran down her spine. It felt as though 1,000 eyes were watching, yet she dismissed it as anxiety. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the sunlight filtering through the broken windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits. She made herself a cup of coffee and ventured outside for fresh air. As she stood on the broken porch, an unsettling shiver coursed through her. The hotel held secrets, and she was determined to exhume them. Days turned into weeks as she toiled alone, digging through far too many years of accumulated debris. Each evening, as she prepared to retire, the atmosphere shifted. Flickering lights cast ominous shadows, and the old radiators groaned like ghosts in anguish. The echoes of laughter meant to haunt, but it was not just sounds that struck her as off, it was the whispers that reached her ears, soft yet insistent, words she couldn't quite grasp. Desperately, she sought comfort in her renovations, pushing through her unease. However, the ghostly whimpers transformed into disembodied sighs that seemed to envelop her. One night, after another grueling day, she discovered an old ledger tucked behind a loose floorboard in a spiral of dust. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in an elegant yet looping script. As she deciphered it, her heart plummeted. Names filled its entries, each paired with an unsettling note. Vanished. Lost interest. Never seen again. The final entry sent a horrifying chill through her. Claire Barnett. Last seen in the ballroom. Whispers of madness. That very night, plagued by dread, Margaret lay awake, taut and restless. Just as the clock told midnight, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing her candle. Shadows flickered against the walls, and she could hear the whispers grow clearer. They beckoned her in dark tones that churned in her chest, a mixture of pleading and warning. Margaret, join us. The pressure mounted against her chest, and her breath escaped her. In that moment, she understood. She wasn't alone. Whatever cursed this hotel had now latched onto her. Desperate to escape, she bolted towards the door, but it slammed shut, the laughter of the lost filling the air. The next morning, Rookhaven Hotel stood silent as ever, its doors shut tight. The townsfolk would find the place unchanged, oblivious to the added weight of a soul bound within its cursed walls. A new entry among the vanished, where whispers of madness now danced alongside Margaret's still unheard pleas. The old Oakwood Hotel loomed in the distance, its weathered facade bathed in the eerie glow of the setting sun. A group of 5 friends, Alice, Mark, Lucy, Tom, and Mia, had decided it was the perfect spot for their weekend getaway. Little did they know, Oakwood had been abandoned for decades, a remnant of a bygone era, whispered about in town as a place where the dead lingered. With a sense of adventure bubbling in their chests, the friends entered the lobby, the chill in the air prickling their skin. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light that broke through the grimy windows, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. A cracked bell at the front desk called out for attention, and after some hesitation, Mark rang it. The sound echoed ominously. To their surprise, an elderly man appeared, his face paled and gaunt. "Welcome to Oakwood," he muttered, his voice thin like the air around them. "The spirits are eager to meet new guests." They exchanged uneasy glances, but shrugged it off as part of the hotel's creepy charm. After checking in, they made their way down the dimly lit hallway, their footsteps muffled against the worn carpet. Rooms lined the walls, each adorned with peeling wallpaper and faded photographs of past guests, their smiling eyes now empty. As they settled into their room, laughter momentarily drowned out the oppressive silence, but a chill hung in the air, an unseen presence watching them. That night, while the group shared ghost stories, the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. A soft whisper slithered through the room. "Stay. Forever." Tom laughed it off, but Alice felt a shiver of dread crawl up her spine. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just the wind," Mia reassured her, but a cloud of unease settled over them like a weighted blanket. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden knock echoed from the door. Startled, they exchanged glances. "Who's there?" Lucy called out, her heart racing. No answer. Mark crept toward the door, his hand trembling on the knob. Maybe it's room service? He opened the door to reveal nothing but empty hallway and darkness. As he stepped back, he felt a cold rush behind him, followed by a chorus of whispers. Stay. Stay. The hotel shifted. The walls seemed to close in, and the air thickened. Mia screamed as a figure materialized in the corner. A woman in an old-fashioned gown, her face twisted in sorrow. You'll never leave, she rasped, the words echoing with a weight of despair. Panic ensued. They rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if some unseen force held it fast. The whispers grew louder, a dissonant chant promising a fate worse than death. Stay. Alice collapsed to the floor, her breath quickening. We need to get out, she cried. Lucy, trying to reassure her, looked around frantically for an escape. There has to be a way. But every window was barred, every door locked. Tom's face paled, and despair settled over the group as they realized the truth. They were trapped, ensnared by the spirits who roamed the halls. As the ethereal figures encircled them, their hollow eyes pleading and rageful, Alice finally whispered in stark realization, "We're just like them now. We'll never leave." In the heart of the Oakwood Hotel, laughter ceased, and the air filled with the echoes of the past. Wearied souls forever welcoming new guests to their eternal home of torment. The night air was thick with excitement as Jake, Mia, Sam, and Linda gathered at the mouth of Bone Hollow Cave, its jagged entrance yawning like the maw of a beast. The flickering glow of their headlamps illuminated the rough, damp stone walls, and the suspense crackled among them like static electricity. They had heard stories about this cave, whispers of shadows shifting and eerie echoes that didn't belong to the wind. Ignoring the warnings, their adventurous spirits guided them into the darkness. With each step deeper into the cave, the scratchy whispers grew louder in their minds, but they chalked it up to nerves. Hours slipped by as they navigated through narrow passages and wide caverns adorned with crystalline formations. The echoes of their laughter bounced off the walls, an optimistic counterpoint to the encroaching gloom. Mia, ever the inquisitive one, noticed a crevice that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. "Guys, check this out," she shouted, her voice echoing through the damp air. The others joined her, peering into the narrow opening as a chilly breeze slipped through, carrying with it an ethereal whisper. "Is it just me, or does it feel alive?" Linda quipped, shivering despite the warmth of their gear. But curiosity outweighed caution as they squeezed through the crevice, emerging into a room of low-hanging stalactites that dripped with condensation. In the center of the chamber lay an altar of stone, etched with strange, twisting runes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. A grotesque idol rested on the altar, its visage a terrible amalgamation of human and beast, eyes hollow and accusatory. "Guys, we shouldn't be here," Sam said, unease creeping into his voice. But before he could suggest turning back, Mia placed her hand on the idol's surface. As she did, the air turned cold, and the ground trembled. "Whoa, what the?" Jake exclaimed, stepping back as the runes ignited, casting an unholy glow throughout the chamber. Shadows leapt and danced around them, growing thicker and darker. "What did you do?" Sam yelled, but before anyone could respond, the walls echoed with a guttural growl, shaking the very earth beneath them. A dark mist coiled from the idol, curling toward the friends like a snake hunting its prey. Panic set in as Linda stumbled back, her heart racing. "We need to leave," she screamed, but as they turned, the entrance to the altar room sealed shut, a wall of stone rising to trap them within. The shadows tightened their grip, and from the darkness emerged a figure of unimaginable horror, its form ever shifting, a collage of nightmares. Its eyes burned like coals, boring into them with an ancient malice. "Foolish mortals," it hissed, the voice a toxic blend of laughter and fury. "You have disturbed my slumber." As the entity loomed closer, their flashlights flickered, throwing wild shadows against the walls. Jake, filled with a sudden surge of courage, thrust his arms into the darkness, a feeble attempt to push the entity away. But it was too late. The shadows engulfed Mia first, a soundless scream trapped within the choking darkness. One by one, the entity's whispers coiled around the others, dulling their cries to echoes swallowed by the cave. Hours later, silence enveloped Bone Hollow. The altar stood undisturbed, the cursed idol gleaming once more as the whispers faded into the stone, awaiting the next group of adventurous fools who would unwittingly awaken its dark hunger. The sun was a fading ember in the sky as four friends, Emily, Sam, Jake, and Lisa, ventured deeper into the woods. They had come for a weekend of camping, seeking an escape from the monotony of their lives. But as the branches overhead twisted like skeletal fingers, an unshakable feeling of unease settled over them. "Are we sure we should be this far in?" Emily's voice quivered slightly, the sound swallowed by the thickening shadows. The group had chosen a spot far from the trail, drawn by the allure of seclusion. "Relax, Em," Jake replied, rolling his eyes. "It's just some trees. We'll set up camp and have some fun." Lisa, ever the realist, glanced around. "It feels quiet." The chirping of the birds had silenced, and the usual rustle of small animals was replaced by an oppressive stillness. They set up in their tent in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. As night rolled in, the trees enveloped them, pressing close like spectators in a dimly lit theater. They gathered around a crackling fire, shadows dancing grotesquely on the trees. "Tell ghost stories," Sam suggested, grinning at the thrill of it. "Let's scare ourselves." With a spark ignited by the fire's light, Jake leaned forward, his eyes alight with mischief. "I know a good one. Legend has it this forest is haunted by the Wilkins family. They vanished over 50 years ago. Some say their spirits wander, looking for something or someone." The flames flickered, casting an eerie glow over their faces. Lisa's laughter was shaky, masking her discomfort. "That's just a story for entertaining kids." But Sam was intrigued. "What happened to them?" "They say they were on a camping trip just like ours," Jake continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "One night, they heard laughter, children's laughter. They followed it deeper into the woods, and they never came back." Wind sighed through the trees, a mournful response. Convinced they were safe, they dismissed the tale, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching. Hours passed, filled with laughter and s'mores, until an unsettled silence returned. Lisa, tuning into the eerie atmosphere, suggested they turn in early. As they shuffled into the tent, the fire's glow faded, leaving only the sounds of their breathing and the rustle of leaves. In the dead of night, a distant laughter echoed through the trees, soft and melodic. It rifled through Emily's dream, twisting it into a nightmare. Jarring her awake, she nudged the others. "Did you hear that?" "What?" Sam mumbled, clearly still trapped in slumber. "The laughter. It's outside," she insisted, heart racing. "Just the wind," Jake muttered dismissively, but his voice carried a tinge of uncertainty. Before they could settle back, the laughter rose again, closer this time, hauntingly cheerful. Adrenaline surged. They unzipped the tent and piled out, confronted by an unnatural stillness. In the clearing, the fire had extinguished, and shadows loomed larger than they should. The laughter grew into a cacophony, echoing around them. "Let's get out of here," Sam shouted, but the ground felt sticky underfoot, as if the forest were latching on. One by one, like puppets severed from their strings, they were separated. Emily's heart raced as she sprinted through the darkness, the laughter morphing into cries for help. But behind her were only shadows, and the trees themselves seemed to twist, blocking her path. "Jake? Lisa? Sam?" she yelled. But only the night responded, blanketing her in a suffocating silence. And then she was utterly alone, lost in a forest ravenous for their very souls. As the sun dipped below the skyline of Cypress University, Sophie settled into her dorm room, room 217. The walls were draped in faded posters and scattered laundry, remnants of her hurried attempt to bring a piece of home to this overwhelming place. Though excited to start her sophomore year, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that seemed to linger in the air. It began subtly. Strange noises crept into her dreams. A soft echo of laughter, like the mocking giggles of children playing outside her window. Sophie brushed it off as her mind adjusting to new surroundings. As the week wore on, unsettling occurrences heightened her anxiety. On Tuesday, she found a perfectly folded sweater on her desk, a piece she distinctly remembered tossing into a laundry basket. Convinced that her roommate Jen had played a prank, she laughed it off. But Jen assured her it wasn't her doing, her wide-eyed disbelief confirming Sophie's growing paranoia. That night, Sophie awoke to whispers that slithered through the walls like serpents. The darkness felt alive, coiling around her neck. Frightened, she pulled the covers tightly, her heart hammering against her chest. She wanted to scream, to call for Jen, but the voice in her head warned her against it. Fear curled her thoughts in on themselves, urging her to remain still, to pretend she was asleep. By the end of the week, exhaustion seeped into her bones, and the laughter and whispers escalating in volume and frequency. Her once vibrant spirit dimmed under the weight of her tormentor. She started keeping her room locked, convinced that whatever lived here was trying to infiltrate her life. But the mimic was patient. It learned her routines, her fears, and her insecurities. On Friday night, she returned from a study session to find the lights flickering. In the corner of her room, the shadowy silhouettes danced, a dark reflection of herself. Every inch of her screamed to leave, but a heavy, intrusive sensation held her firmly in place. "Don't you want to play?" a voice beckoned, lilting and indistinguishable from her own. It echoed with a blend of sweetness and malice, malforming her sense of self. Sophie stumbled backward, slamming against the door. "Get out! Leave me alone!" she shouted, though she felt like she was pleading with herself. The reflections laughed and twisted into grotesque versions of her face, eyes glimmering with malevolence. Desperation surged through her veins as she recognized the mimic for what it was, a parasite feeding off of her fears. She knew it could disguise itself perfectly, but Sophie was determined to confront it. She had understood its game. Gathering her courage, she stared into the shadows, arms crossed defiantly. "You'll never be me," she declared. "I'm stronger than you think." The laughter stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. The silhouettes flickered, faltering as though caught off guard. Sophie took a step forward. "You may imitate me, but I'm real, and you can't have what's mine." The walls trembled, the shadows writhed in anger, but she pressed on. "You have no power here," she shouted, each word delivered with fiery conviction. The dark mimic slipped, dissipating into a puff of black smoke, leaving the room eerily still. Sophie collapsed onto her bed, heart racing, but a newfound belief coursed through her. She reclaimed the space that was once held captive. She realized the mimic thrived on fear, but she had learned its secret, and she would never let it play her again. As she closed her eyes that night, she knew true strength resided within her, even in the darkness. Derek had always loved the thrill of losing himself among the shelves of books, but nothing could prepare him for the day he entered the old Hartwick Library. It was a sprawling maze of towering shelves, winding corridors, and echoing silence. Situated at the edge of the college campus, a relic from a past era. Most students avoided it, whispering rumors that it was haunted, but Derek saw it as a refuge, a place where he could escape the pressures of student life. As he stepped inside, an unsettling chill crept through him, but he brushed it off. Rows upon rows of ancient tomes loomed like sentinels, and he felt a thrill of anticipation. This library had a kind of magic, he thought, as he wandered deeper into the shadows. He meandered further, enchanted by the dusty volumes that seemed to call out to him. With each aisle he explored, he inadvertently found more obscure titles, their spines cracked and faded. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and the golden light from outside faded to the muted glow of the library lamps. He was drawn to a secluded corner where a particularly narrow aisle beckoned him. There, Derek discovered a book unlike any he had seen before. Bound in dark leather and embossed with arcane symbols, its title read, "The Labyrinth of Shadows." Curiosity surged within him, and he pulled it from the shelf. Dust motes danced in the air as he pried it open, revealing pages that whispered secrets he couldn't quite hear. He felt an irresistible urge to continue reading, and as he turned the pages, strange incantations began to echo in his mind. Suddenly the ground trembled slightly beneath him. He looked around. Had he moved? The aisles that had cradled him in intrigue now twisted like a serpent, forming a labyrinth he had not noticed before. The shelves seemed to shift around him, changing the landscape of the library. Taking a deep breath, he pressed onward, hoping to find an exit. As he wandered deeper, the atmosphere thickened, and the lights flickered. Shadows slithered along the spines of the books, whispering in hushed tones that danced just out of reach of his understanding. Panic gripped him. The air turned dense, laden with a sense of forbidding. "Derek," a voice called from the depths of the shadows, familiar yet distorted. He froze, recognizing his mother's tone, carefully laced with worry. "Derek, are you okay?" The sound echoed unnaturally, curving and rippling through the labyrinth. "It's just your mind playing tricks," he muttered, trying to convince himself, but a part of him was drawn to the echoes, compelled to follow the sound. He turned a corner, only to be met by an endless row of bookshelves, towering higher than before. Desperation began to claw at him. His footsteps grew frantic as he raced back the way he thought he had come, but the very architecture of the library seemed to conspire against him. The aisles shifted, the paths folded in on themselves like an origami of despair. With every corner he turned, the whispers grew louder, taunting him, beckoning him deeper into their realm. "Join us, Derek. Stay." In that moment, the shadows coalesced into shapes, vague like smoke but growing more defined. Faceless figures emerged, eyes hollow and mouths twisted in eternal hunger. They drifted closer, and he understood. This library fed off the lost, those who wandered too far into its depths. Then, with a final lurch of despair, the world blurred. Derek was swallowed by the labyrinth, a mere whisper lingering in the air, one more lost soul among endless tomes, forever seeking a way out. The library closed its door with a final echoing thud and once again fell silent. The moon hung high, a pale orb casting an eerie glow over the sprawling expanse of St. Agnes Cemetery. Laughter echoed through the night as a group of 5 college students, adrenaline fueled by cheap beer and flimsy dares, stumbled through the wrought iron gates. They had decided on a night exploration of the cemetery. Legend had it that the old graveyard was haunted, guarded by stone gargoyles that watched over the resting souls. As they crossed the threshold, the air shifted. A heavy stillness enveloped them, the cacophony of revelry from the nearby party fading into an unsettling silence. Bailey, the self-appointed leader, pointed toward the crumbling stones adorned with grotesque faces. "Let's go check out the gargoyles," she declared, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Rory, one of the quieter members, hesitated. "Maybe we should stick to the paths. This place gives me the creeps." But his protests were drowned in the chorus of cheers as the others pressed forward, lured by the thrill of the unknown. They wandered deeper into the cemetery, navigating between tombstones engraved with names from centuries past. Finally, they reached a circle of 5 gargoyles perched atop a weathered mausoleum, their chiseled faces frozen in grotesque expressions of fear and rage. The sight sent a shiver down Rory's spine, but the others merely tittered nervously. "Let's take a selfie," exclaimed Amara, holding her phone aloft. As they clustered around the gargoyle, the atmosphere felt charged, as if the stones were alive with something far beyond the living. With a click of a camera, a sound broke the night, a low, rumbling growl. The group froze, exchanging confused glances. "Was that—" began Noah, but before he could finish, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The gargoyles seemed to shift, their stone bodies cracked as though awakening from a long slumber. "Guys, this isn't funny," Rory shouted, stepping back, a sense of dread rising in his chest. But the others laughed, mistaking his fear for a prank. "Come on, let's keep moving," Bailey urged, dismissing him. They walked on, unaware of the shadows that twisted around them, their laughter mingling with the wind. A feeling of being watched crawled over Rory in waves. The gargoyle eyes, it seemed, bore into him with an intensity that drew him back. "I think we should leave," he implored, but his voice was lost in the group's revelry. Suddenly, Amara screamed. Ahead of them, the path was blocked by a shifting figure emerging from the darkness. An aberration draped in shadows with the outline of twisted limbs and a grotesque maw. The moment flooded with fear, and Bailey screamed as she stumbled back into the grasp of one of the gargoyles, its stone form abruptly come to life. The partygoers scattered, running in different directions. Rory's heart raced as he darted toward the exit, fear propelling him forward. Behind him, he heard shouts and the sickening sound of stones scraping against flesh. Breathless, he finally burst back into the moonlight, collapsing against the cemetery gate. The sounds of laughter and music from the party returned, but terror gnawed at him. He turned back to look, and the gargoyles stood still once more, their eyes glistening under the moonlight, vigilantly watching over their stone domain. Rory's heart sank as he realized midnight had come. He could never go back, but something within the cemetery would never leave him. Some sinister secret entwined among the stones. He turned away, but the whispers of the dead still swirled in the night, haunting him with every shuddering breath. The autumn wind howled like a mournful spirit as Jasper stumbled into the dimly lit basement of his friend's house. Flickering candles threw eerie shadows against the walls, and the scent of musty old books hung heavy in the air. Jasper, a 20-something with a penchant for recklessness, felt a thrill course through him as he spotted the Ouija board set out on a rickety table. "Come on, man, let's do this," he called out to his friends, Lisa and Mark, who were lingering hesitantly at the top of the stairs. They exchanged doubtful glances, but eventually followed him down, curiosity piquing their interest. Mark, ever the worrywart, was cautious. "You know we should look up the rules first, right? I mean, the stuff isn't just a joke." Jasper waved him off, dismissing the idea. "It's just a game. How bad could it be?" Lisa rolled her eyes, but she sat beside him at the table. The board was ornately designed, letters and numbers glistening under the candlelight. Jasper rested his fingers on the planchette, the tiny triangular piece that would supposedly guide them toward the messages from the beyond. "Let's ask something simple. Is anyone there?" Jasper leaned in, excitement dancing in his eyes. The planchette rested still for a moment before, unexpectedly, it began to slide across the board. Jasper's heart raced, and he laughed nervously, convinced that his friends were causing it to move. "Come on, you're not even trying, guys." But then, it stopped at the letter H. Hello?" Jasper stuttered, suppressing a shiver of fear. To their shock, the planchette glided to E, then L, and finally L. "Hello?" Lisa repeated slowly, unease settling in. Jasper, spurred by bravado, pressed further. "What's your name?" D, E, V. The planchette moved again, and this time, Jasper felt a chill wash over him. "Devon," he translated. Mark frowned, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "We should stop. Let's not go further." "Oh, relax. It's just a word game," Jasper insisted. But his bravado began to wane as a cold draft enveloped the room. "Are you anxious to communicate, Devon?" Lisa asked, trying to sound confident. The planchette shot to Y, and then rapidly slid to E and S. As the candles flickered, Jasper could swear he heard a whisper, but when he turned to look, only silence stared back. But Lisa, her eyes wide, pointed to the shadows looming behind them. "Did you see that?" Before Jasper could reply, a shadow darted across the room, heavy and dark, as though something primal and ancient had been awakened. The temperature plummeted, and a sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. "Jasper, we have to leave. Now!" Mark shouted. But it was too late. The planchette began to move again. Each letter it spelled out felt like a death knell. Y, O, U. Jasper's gaze went from the board to his friends, horror creeping into his bones as the realization struck him. He had called out something he didn't understand, awakened something best left undisturbed, something that was now eyeing him with an insatiable hunger. "Please," Jasper pleaded as the shadow surged forward, swallowing them in its cold embrace. Through laughter and bravado, he had invited nonsense into reality, and now he was not the one holding the board. The words of a foolish 20-something echoed in the depths of darkness. How bad could it be? The wind howled through the dilapidated mansion, whipping leaves around like whispers of the departed. Eleanor, a middle-aged woman with a penchant for the paranormal, stood at the threshold of Blackwood Manor, her heart racing. She had always been intrigued by the supernatural, but had never ventured into a place as notorious as this. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of the spirits that roamed the halls, and Eleanor felt a mixture of excitement and dread as she crossed the threshold. Armed with her camera, EMF meter, and sage, she entered the house. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by her flashlight. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a distant memory, haunting and melancholic. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she climbed the grand staircase, feeling the temperature drop with each step. "Show me you're here," she called out, her voice steady but her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The air thickened, and the shadows seemed to flicker in response. Eleanor's EMF meter beeped sporadically, drawing her deeper into the house. The first room she entered was the parlor. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating an old piano covered in dust and decay. As she walked closer, her breath caught in her throat. Unseen fingers danced across the keys, a haunting melody whispering through the air. Eleanor instinctively reached for her camera, capturing every moment, but the music ceased abruptly, plunging the room into an eerie silence. "You are not welcome here," a voice rasped from the shadows, sending chills down her spine. Eleanor spun around, her flashlight illuminating nothing but the remnants of a once lavish room. Panic welled up inside her, but she pressed on. "I mean you no harm," she called out, hoping for a response. Instead, the temperature dropped further, numbing her fingers. The walls seemed to pulse with life, shadows warping into grotesque forms. Eleanor could feel eyes watching her, and a sense of despair enveloped her like a wet blanket. Her EMF meter exploded with activity, the lights blinking furiously. She stumbled back, colliding with the piano, which emitted a discordant note that echoed through the parlor. In a panic, Eleanor fled to the next room, what appeared to be a former study. The air was thick with rot and despair. As she entered, the door slammed shut behind her. She rushed to open it, but the handle twisted like a taunting hand, refusing to budge. "Help me, please," a childlike voice swept from the corner. Eleanor's heart sank. She turned slowly, the voice pulling her closer. A small figure, a boy, stood in the shadows, his eyes hollow. "They won't let me leave. You have to help me." She fought the urge to rush to him, feeling the pull of the spirits growing stronger. Eleanor felt a sharp tug at her chest, like icy fingers gripping her heart. "What do you want from me?" she cried out. "They want you," he whispered, his voice dripping with sorrow. Shadows swirled around him, stretching toward Eleanor like dark tendrils craving warmth. With a surge of determination, Eleanor retrieved her sage and lit it. The fragrant smoke billowed up, filling the room. "You have to leave, all of you." The shadows recoiled, shrieking in rage. The boy's face twisted, and suddenly he wasn't just a child, but a ghastly specter, a warning. The walls seemed to close in, the room pulsating with an otherworldly fury. The door burst open with a deafening bang, and Eleanor sprinted through the threshold, propelled by fear. Outside, the wind howled, leaving her gasping for breath, the shadows clawing at her sanity as she fled Blackwood Manor. As she reached her car, she glanced back. The windows of the manor flickered like distant eyes, watching, waiting. Blackwood's legacy wasn't done with her yet. Oliver Graves had always prided himself on being a rational man. At 45, he was the head of a small real estate firm, known for his logical mind and uncanny ability to assess properties. His life, however, took an unsettling turn when he inherited his late aunt's decaying Victorian house. The old estate, perched on a hill, towered like a forgotten sentinel. Its windows were dark eyes, gazing down on the town with a lingering sadness. Despite his apprehension, Oliver saw potential. After a few renovation projects, he could flip it and make a tidy profit. On the first night after he moved in, Oliver felt an uneasy chill in the long, dark hallways. Dismissing it as draftiness, he trudged through the layer of dust that blanketed the floors. His aunt had always been a bit eccentric. Perhaps there was just an old woman's energy lingering. He chuckled to himself, determined to caffeine his way through the evening. As the clock struck midnight, a creak echoed from the upper floor, followed by soft whispers. His heart thundered in his chest as he climbed the staircase, gripping the banister tightly. The air grew dense with the cold that seeped through his skin. "Hello?" he called, his voice trembling in the oppressive silence. Only the distant rustle of wind through the chinks in the windows answered him. He returned to the living room, forcing down the unease that tightened around his throat. As he settled on the worn couch, the whispers became clearer, almost maddeningly so. They twisted into words. Leave. Go. Ignoring the chill creeping up his spine, he dismissed the sounds as mere echoes of his imagination. Yet each night brought new torment. The walls whispered his insecurities to him, while shadows flickered at the corner of his vision, taunting him with glimpses of their long-lost lives. Days turned into weeks, and the ghosts became bolder over time. Objects began to shift when he wasn't looking, a chair found on its side, a book inexplicably missing from the shelf. Each time he confronted them, grim shadows danced just out of sight, smiling at his growing paranoia. Frustrated and exhausted, Oliver sought solace in sleep, but the restless spirits denied him that too. Each night they visited him in his dreams, dragging him into nightmarish landscapes, their voices shrill with accusation. "You're not worthy to be here," they shrieked, their spectral faces contorted with rage. The nightly visions gnawed at Oliver's sanity until he could no longer tell where reality ended and hallucinations began. On the last night of October, he resolved to confront the spirit's tormentors. Perhaps lighting a candle in the dead of night would appease them, a feeble act of defiance against the unknown. With a flickering taper in hand, Oliver climbed the staircase, the shadows stretching like cold fingers towards him. As he crossed the threshold of the attic, a cacophony erupted, a whirlwind of whispers, cries, and laughter. The very air crackled with an otherworldly energy. "Who are you?" he shouted, the flame in his hand sputtering. Suddenly the faces of his ancestors materialized before him, twisted with sorrow and rage. They reached out, their cool hands brushing against his skin, pulling him closer to the void. "You should never have come," they hissed in unison. As Oliver's screams swallowed his breath, he realized he was not merely an unwelcome guest. He was a prisoner of their legacy, forever bound to a house that hungered for despair. All echoes of reason fled him, as he became just another whisper in the dark.